Thanks for attending this presentation, how to start documenting the network. Must be a New Year's resolution for a lot of people, I would imagine. Hopefully it's one of those things we can show you a few pointers and help you guys get started doing that. So just quickly, my name is, you see it on the screen there, Jason Sherman. So I'm with Graphical Networks. We have a product called NetTerrain that helps you document your network. I think the presentation's applicable, at least some of the concepts are applicable, whether you're looking at a tool like NetTerrain or other tools that are out there. So, it's not just, certainly it's geared towards some of the things we do, but the concepts about getting data, collecting data, those things I think are somewhat universal. So I'm going to point those things out. I've got a really complicated slideshow here, i.e. a notepad document. So I'm not big on slideshows and PowerPoints and things like that. I figured I would just talk through our product and talk about different concepts and how to get started. Why did this sort of webinar come up? Well, we created a blog article, how to start documenting the network, back in December. I've been sort of writing about different things having to do with network documentation. This was always kind of one of those things that comes up pretty regularly. For most people don't have network documentation, it's one of those things, hey, where do we get started? I'm certainly not going to read this, but if you want to go to our blogs, and there's quite a few articles up there having to do with different things with network documentation. So certainly you can check that out on our website. You just go to graphicalnetworks.com and look for the blog section at the top. So this was sort of about documentation made easy. How do we try and get this as easy as possible for doing network documentation? Of course, there's always that first fundamental question of what do you mean, documenting the network? So it means different things to different people, and it depends on certainly what it is you're trying to overall accomplish. I tell people, focus on the task at hand, the thing that's most critical, important to what you're trying to do, and try not to get off topic or not off topic, sort of get distracted by other, we'll call it features of products. We have a lot of features in our tool, but what you really want to do is hopefully focus on the thing that's solving the issue that you have today. It's nice, of course, to know that there's other things there in a tool that might help you down the road, but if you can't get that first step going and get things taken care of, sort of a moot point. So let me also back up a second. I apologize. I'm a little bit under the weather here, so I may, it might be a little hard to hear me, or obviously probably sound like I've got a frog in my throat. So, and if you do have questions, you can open a question up in the go-to webinar somewhere. There's a button you can press and post a question. I'll look for those at the end and try and answer those here. But in addition, reach out to us, graphicalnetworks.com. There's a live chat button. There's a phone. You can call us. We actually will pick up the phone and talk to you. That's actually my preferred method of communication. Certainly over versus email and other forms. So I just assume talk to you. And, just ask questions. We're not going to hold you to anything. I'm not going to, not talk to you unless you're buying something or something like that. So we're always happy to reach out and just discuss what you're trying to do, see if there's a fit, may or may not be. So back to network documentation. So you look at a project like network documentation and you decide, hey, what's critical, what's important. I have some customers that they document primarily just core circuits and what they're connected to, and that's it. They don't care about switches, routers, patch panels, and other things, because that's not what's critical to them as far as solving a problem. Keeping track of some core information about the network. So, where do I go? Where do you go when you have a network outage? You have a critical circuit that goes down. If you don't have a central place to go, whether it's a spreadsheet that's up to date or Visio or whatever tool you're using, if it's not up to date with good information, you're scrambling around trying to find things, simple things. I need to find a phone number of this vendor. What's our support contract ID? What's our phone numbers? Those are things that slow you down and will frustrate you when you have some sort of crisis. So those all fall into things that that you have to think about too, which is what is the data that I need to capture and gather that's important to me. In my project, yes, we do use our software. In my NetTerrain project, I capture pretty much everything. I capture vendor information. I capture details about the vendors, who I can call, login information, various other details. I mean, those are things that you may or may not care about, but also network stuff, of course. Servers, routers, switches, how they're connected together physically, logically, and so on. I've got a cloud infrastructure, so I document AWS in there. I document applications, where they're running, how they're running, and sort of the process and overview of some of my systems. So that's important for me because that saves me time. That saves us time as a company. If there's an outage, if there's somebody that needs to log into a system, how do they do that? Where is it? And, how critical is it if it goes down? So anyway, sorry to get on my soapbox. Sometimes I get going. So logical network, that kind of documentation, just basically how are things logically connected together. That's pretty traditional stuff. Physical, that's a bit more detailed. That's getting down to maybe the device, ports, physical connections, and so on. What level of detail do you want to get? I mean, get the level of detail that makes sense again for what you're trying to accomplish as far as your documentation project. So these are all great, but Jason, how do we do this? What's the how side? What are you going to show me that's, how do I make this happen in my new year? So we, Graphical Network, specifically our product NetTerrain, we kind of give you some tools to accomplish that. Now, of course, it's up to you what level of detail and how you want to collect data that's out there. And the data you collect, you want to think about everything. You want to think about not just your department or your group if you're documenting the network. Think about where you may have data that's going to help you with this task. Is it a purchasing system, a procurement system, if I could speak? Maybe there's data about our systems in there that I could take advantage of. I'm probably not going to have IP address information, and they have costs and stuff. Maybe that's important. Maybe it's not. So a network monitoring system. Look, everybody's got 20 of these things. Monitoring management systems. They got open source. They got ones they pay for. But they're all disparate. They all have different pieces of data. But those are things you look at as a whole when you're doing network documentation. What are my options here? What can I take advantage of? Excel spreadsheets, Visio. I mean, these are common tools that people use in their environments. The problem with them is there's really no automation, and they're not always up to date, and they get out of date and various other things. I mean, and before I go on, sort of get off on another little tangent, which is keeping things up to date. Of course, you want automation. There's usually only so much automation you can get in a network management system. I should say a network documentation system, right? So you may be able to get 100% automation depending on the project at hand. But with that said, automation, and I'm not talking about discovery automation. Automation, I should back up. It's about your processes too. I work with a lot of customers who are successful at this. Is it the ones that only have automation? No, definitely not. Certainly some do, and they do a great job of it, and it really helps them, and they do automate their network documentation. I have lots of customers that, how they do it? Manual. But it's part of a process. It's your job when you update something that you go do this, X, Y, and Z. I'm not saying you do that because most people want to try and do automation as much as possible. But in some cases, maybe that's the best approach for what you're doing, depending on the network side. Of course, resources is the big deal, right? Who's going to, who always has a dedicated person. But with a lot of these things, you find, especially after you get started, it's a couple hours a week. It's small little things here. But again, if you don't build a process around it, it's going to fail. I assure you of that. Again, we've got a lot of experience in this space, and I can tell you, why these things fail. And the other reason would be, hey, somebody's really not giving you the resources. I don't mean just manpower. I mean the ability to do this. This is a project that the company has said, hey, this is important for us to have this. If you don't have that, if your boss doesn't give you buy-in, or your boss's boss, or whoever you need, I wouldn't even start. I would just leave it the way it is and just keep moving on. That's just one of those things we've learned over time. So let me get back on track here, which is talking about the how to stuff here. Give me 1 second here. I'm just going to pause this. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I haven't gone anywhere. I just want to make sure. Okay. I just want to make sure that I'm not, that somebody didn't Skype me and say, hey, we can't hear you. I've talked all that time and nobody heard me. So let me just minimize that. So different ways of getting data and bringing it in. I mean, one way is manual. You might have some documentation in a Word doc or wherever. Drag and drop an object. So we're a drag and drop tool. You double click, you drill down, and then from here you can start to drag things into your project. It doesn't have to be these logical looking things. You can bring in a dollar thing, things that look like a firewall or an AWS or whatever. And then you start connecting things. I mean, this is more of a logical type drawing I'm doing here, where I'm basically, creating objects and creating physical or logical connections, things like that. Physical is going to be more a hierarchy. I'm not going to waste your time me showing you all that, but I will show you some example drawings of what you could do in network documentation. But again, how do you get the data in? One of the so a hierarchy, maybe more physical, is where you're basically navigating down from a high level down into a project. So you could build all this again manually. Better approach is what I'll typically tell you is, unless you have really no documentation, most people have at least something, maybe Excel or something like that. I would say, maybe you should focus on using something like an Excel spreadsheet to build out your project. So whether or not you have data, everybody understands Excel for one. You basically give a format. Here's a spreadsheet. This is how we fill it in. This is the data we can collect. And then we press a button and it uploads the data into, in my case, in my tool, NetTerrain. You'll see it'll build a hierarchy and do that kind of thing. So it's just going to take a minute here. But, obviously if you have hundreds or thousands of objects, it takes a bit of time to import. That's all right. You just start that as you're heading home for the weekend or the night. So in my case, what I imported was this spreadsheet here. Seattle and Washington, these are region objects, and the parent is Excel import. These are some cabinets and some devices and cards and some, I actually have, I think, a link in here too. But these are things you think about, right? Network documentation. Can I import the data using something like Excel or a CSV or whatever it happens to be? These are the cabinets that were created. There's that link, a double click, drill down. Here's a device. This is what we call reference node. There's a device. It actually rack mounted it, put it in position. Here's a card, it put in position, and all the way down to a port on a card. And this is what it's connected to. And I could have it drill create a circuit layout record for me. So this is one form of automating your documentation. Now this is bulk import documentation though. This is like a one-time import thing where you come in here and you bring in your data and it's there, but then you have to maintain it and update it and give it care and feeding and all that good stuff. So that's the manual process in doing an import. We support Excel. We actually have a video import. Depending on what you're doing, it may or may not really be useful for you. It just depends. We have a NetVis. So if you're still using the old NetVis product, it's a great desktop tool, but it hasn't been supported in years. But we still have a lot of people that use it. Or KMZ. So if you're doing outside plant, if you're doing Google Earth, that kind of thing, you can do a KMZ import. So data synchronization. Well, what is that? So I haven't gotten discovery yet. Data sync is basically using data you have, network monitoring data, network management, asset management, whatever it is. We don't really care. We give you the ability to create what we call connectors. And these connectors can do things like connect to a data set. So for instance, you might have SolarWinds. It's a pretty popular tool that people use. So SolarWinds goes out and does a network discovery. So what do? We pull data from SolarWinds and bring it into NetTerrain. And then it'll put the data wherever you want it to go. It'll create the objects, put it in place, and so on. SCOM. We have a lot of pre-built connectors, but one of the things we really try and give you as far as network documentation and doing this sort of sync process is creating your own connectors. What does that mean? Like, what is a connector? A connector is a connection to a data source. So let me just show an example. I've got a workflow here. So you have your net terrain here. You've set it up, configured it, and you want to pull data into it. So we talked about being a user and manually putting data in, or being a user and doing an Excel import. But what if I have data that's constantly updating or changing? Maybe I have a BMC remedy or HP OpenView or SolarWinds. It really doesn't matter, other data set. You can create these, again, this thing called a connector that lets you connect to the data source and bring the data back into NetTerrain and use that data. And it can be something where it runs on a continuous basis, where it's constantly pulling data. So you set it up, you go in here, and you can configure it so it runs on a regular interval, and not just one connector. You have multiple connectors. So if you have SolarWinds and SCOM and all these other things, you can do all these connections and set those up to pull the data on a regular basis. We support most data sets, or you can always switch to using something like an API. The API is a little more work, just from the standpoint of there's some programming in there. And then I'm not talking about us on our side necessarily. I'm talking about, you may have an API for the tool that you're using that's storing data that you want to get out of it, and maybe they don't have an open database, so you have to use the API. So we support those types of functionality. That's a little more involved, but if you talk to us about it, we can determine if it's possible what you're trying to do. So we, create these connections. They run on a regular basis, and they discover new data, and then they update existing data. So it's constantly pulling new information in, and the data is up to you. It can actually place objects, much like my Excel import did, right? It placed the object as a child container, so it created the router and put it into the actual rack. So that's pretty cool. So if you have that data, it can do that for you as well. I have to say, most people don't capture that data. They forget to capture location information in their data sources, or they forget to, specify what rack and things like that, where things are located. So, but that's okay. We can still create it, then you just move it in place, and then it just stays there. It's not going to move automatically. It'll just stay in place. So it works pretty well. So in that case, you're doing a synchronization. You're doing some automation. It may not be 100%, but you're getting to the point where you're at least leveraging data you have. So maybe it's 85, 90% done for you. And then you have to go in and maybe move some things around or change an icon here and there, whatever it happens to be. So now the holy grail, I guess, of network documentation is being able to have it automate complete your network, what it looks like, how it's all connected. But usually you need to do a combination of things to make that happen. Certainly data discovery is one of those things. Data discovery being, I want to use what's out there about the devices to do a discovery. I mean, I do get questions every now and then from people. It's like, I want to discover my network. Okay, well, let's talk about, what do you have in your network environment that we can use to do the discovery? Is SNMP turned on? No. Right there, if you don't have SNMP turned on, or you can't get to SNMP and do CDP and LDP and all these other things, how do you discover the network? I mean, you can do a ping, just get an idea of what's alive out there, but are you really getting the details of the equipment? Are you discovering links and, layer 3 and various other connections and so on? So today we give you the ability to do things like an SNMP, get WMIs, IPMI, SSH, CDP and LDP, and Nmap. That's something we're enhancing with our discovery process, so we're adding those in. Nmap is basically a discovery tool that can go out and poll a device and try and figure out what it is. It's not using SNMP. It's really just using open port information to try and determine what it is. So it's basically a network scanner. You don't have to use it. It's one of those things. They're all optional how you do it. So what does this kind of look like, and what can it do for you? I mean, it's to help you build your network. So I have a setup here, native SNMP discovery, that we've gone out. I've got some devices out. I have a network simulator, so I go out and do discovery, and it allows me to change network configurations and things. So I do various discoveries and so on. Anyway, I would show you a full discovery, but it takes time. You got to go out. But the process in our case, I mean, you're basically going out and defining an IP address or a range, and you're determining, hey, what do you want to capture? What's the SNMP? In this case, we're talking about SNMP. You can go down to port level detail and other things. Apply, go, and run. And then this was already run. It's green. That means the devices were added automatically in the net terrain. And so what the process looks like is it does a discovery through this tool, this integration toolkit that basically runs where the server is. It discovers all this information, and what does it do? It takes the data, puts it in net terrain, and then from there it can create the objects for you. It can create if it's a workstation or a ProCurve or a Catalyst or whatever it happens to be, it'll create it for you and put it into net terrain. So now we're getting into real heavy, kind of automation stuff. And so I'll show you. So I did a discovery early, and this is basically what it looks like. It's not a terribly beautiful diagram or anything, but it's just to make the point of, let me cancel that. It's going to try and rearrange everything for me. So here I've got, this is what the network looks like that I discovered. Like, well, how do you know that? Well, I'll go back to my example, and this is this tool here that I'm showing you on the screen. This is not my software. This is the software we use to emulate a network. So it allows us to basically go in and say, I want 20 switches and routers, a core router, and 20 switches and a bunch of devices hanging off of them. And that's the network I have here. I could change the configuration topology, but what I go and discover, my expectation is it's going to look like that network, that simulation, and that's what I have here. Now, in my case, I'm discovering the object type, and I'm actually creating the object based from our catalog, and then I'm capturing data about the object. I captured the IP address, system description, system contact, and that's all data that we capture through the discovery process. So you'll see the system name, system IDs, uptimes, and so on. I didn't bring all these data points in. I brought in a few select ones, but I could bring in more. And there's a lot, there's a lot of other things with this product and discovery. You can add your own MIB values to discover. It doesn't have to be networking equipment either. Pretty much anything, any device that's on a network can have SNMP, so it might be a temperature sensor, right? So I have customers that use their temperature sensors. We discover them, pull in the data about the temperature, and that gets fed in the net terrain. Or it could be your UPSs and so on. Now, we also have, as a side note, I mean, we do, as I mentioned, like SNMP discovery, and that's getting the device details. We can also, if you needed it or wanted it, you could also capture the details about power, temperature, and so on. That's what I'm showing on the screen here. This is the interface to what we call our EM, environmental monitoring tool. And effectively what this allows you to do is go in and say, okay, I want to do a discovery of all my devices. I want to, now in this case, I'm not using necessarily SNMP. For my servers, I use IPMI. So there's another protocol for you that you can take advantage of. They're like, well, what is that? If you never really used it, I mean, if you HP, I think it's ILO for HP, and for Dell, I think it's iDRAC, and that's basically IPMI. And this gets you down into the details of doing power and temperature over time, and actually getting into the health of devices, getting sensor readings from the device, in this case, again, servers. But you can do this for get power, let's say, from your UPSs and various other things. So we give you a lot of different means of discovering your network and grabbing data and pulling data in. We're enhancing that, always trying to add new improvements and things to that. But again, if we go back to network documentation, because I'm obviously talking in the context of our product, graphical networks, net terrain. But I think it's kind of universal. I mean, when you do a network documentation, you can set it up where you're just manually doing documentation, that's Visio, Excel, whatever it happens to be. Or you can take advantage of, you go find a tool. Hey, can I use Excel to import the data? Could I import Visio or NetVis or whatever it happens to be? Or could I do other things? I have data in my environment. So these are questions you ask when you go out and you start looking at a tool, whether it's my tool or somebody else's tool. These are some of the things you might ask. You may have a whole list of things you're going to ask, but these are certainly some things that you want to think about when you're trying to make documentation easier on you. There's always work in the beginning. So again, you always got to go back. What's the project? What's the scope? What do we really need to get done here? And how do we do it? And hopefully automate it as best we can. So things to think about. So I'm at almost the end here, and I kind of probably ran out of things to talk about. But if you do have questions, let us know. Hit us up through our website, give us a call, whatever the case may be. We can give you a fuller demo, or normally we like to just talk to you first and see if we're a right fit. If we think we're the right fit, or you think we're the right fit. So with that said, I'm going to see if there's any questions. I don't know if there are. Actually, there were a couple polls. So if you don't mind, if you'll give me 1 second here, I'm just going to launch this poll. And one is just talking about DCIM. And DCIM is basically data center infrastructure management. It's really the physical documentation. So just want to see if you guys are using it. So if you guys will wouldn't mind hitting up that poll. I'm going to close it here in just a second. So if you guys, it's about half, yes, and currently considering it. So looks like there's some people out there looking for tools. All right. So let me close that one. And there's one other poll. I'm going to skip that one, and let me just see if there's any questions out there. Any questions? So look, again, Brad, if you're trying to stop noise. Fred?
Hey, Jason, it's Fred. Thanks for the webinar. There are a couple questions here I saw.
Oh, okay. I didn't see them.
For the discovery, can you set timers or polls, intervals? If you use the discovery?
Yeah, so then the discovery, you can set it up where you can do it every hour, every 24 hours. You can set that date and time also. So like if you just want to do a weekly, I mean, I have customers that like to. The reason you do it more often is because if you want to capture changes in data, there's a data field that is getting updated on a regular basis in your devices, then maybe you want to capture that. Also, we can check status. So if something's up or down, we can basically change the icon or appearance and flash on the screen and say, hey, this thing's down. So in those cases, you might want to do things more often. But I have some customers like, nah, every 24 hours is fine, and they just set it up to do that. Partly because they just want it to run at night. So in the morning, they come in and check it and see where they're at.
So another question was that I have custom MIBs set up in my environment. Can NetTrain import custom MIBs, add additional data layers or data fields into NetTrain?
Yeah, so like the custom MIBs, we give you it's actually pretty cool because you can come in here and say, for this IP address or this range, I can hit a custom MIB and come in here and put in the OID, assign it to a field in NetTerrain, and you can add fields as many as you want in NetTerrain. We're a very flexible tool. You hit add, and then it'll start to pick up that OID that you specified for that range for those devices. So it's pretty easy. Once you know where to locate that information. So.
And the other part of the question was the data fields in NetTerrain. Can we customize or add additional data fields that your discovery engine can capture?
Yeah, so any fields, so when you look at an object, you're going to see on the Cisco 7513, there's a bunch of data fields. I don't have data in all these, but this was actually captured. This was captured, and this was captured from the SNMP discovery. So you can add as many fields as you want. You can add fields, and it will discover those. It'll put that data in. It's just a field map, and it's very simple in the ITK to do that. For the SNMP, it's even simpler if it matches the name that you're collecting, for instance. Up here, like sys description, if that's a field for the object, it'll automatically bring that in. So, but to answer the question, you can add as many fields as you want. You can bring the data into any fields from the external sources, whether it's not just the discovery side, but also what I was talking about, synchronizing or bringing data from external data sources.
All right, there's two last questions I see here. Going back to NetTerrain, can you manipulate the data or the look and feel of data? Or right here, yeah.
Sorry, I might have muted myself. Yeah, to answer the question, so I'll just come back in here. So anytime you look at an object, the data fields can be moved. What's nice too is if you're not discovering certain data, you can still put the data in. So if you know, hey, there's the purchase date, there's some data you have to put in. And if you want to display it, you certainly can. You can resize it, and you can change things like the color and the background color and rotate. And there's a lot of flexibility, and it gives you. So from that standpoint, you can really make the diagrams look really nice. I'm not a very artistic person, so my diagrams have a tendency to be very minimalist. But yeah, you can get into very nice looking drawings, and we can give you a lot of other things too, which are really helpful, which are things like drawing templates where you can apply a look and feel to each drawing, and if you need to change the look and feel, you just change the template, and then every place it was applied, it changes. It's a really nice, again, it's a feature thing, but it's just one of those things that really kind of helps you and saves you time. You can get a lot out of your drawings.
So in addition to like these views, you can also create data center type diagram views as well. So
yeah, you can. Yeah, I'm sorry for going.
No, go ahead.
So when you do a discovery, what's nice too is you can take an object that was discovered, and you can take that object, and we call it aliasing, but you can put it in other drawings or diagrams. So if I do that discovery, and in that particular logical drawing, I need to also show it in a different logical drawing, I can alias it out into the other drawing. I can also put it into the physical. So this object I could drop into a cabinet and have it physically mounted somewhere. So, if you don't have that information, but you do want to show it in the physical, like in a cabinet, you can do that too.
Okay.
Yeah.
One last there's the question about can I search for an IP address? How easy is the search for information?
Repeat that one. I'm not sure I know that one.
How can you do searches in NetTrain? What's the last question?
Oh, searches, sure. So any piece of data that gets brought into NetTrain is indexed. In the upper right corner, there's a search. We also have a search where you can bring up a search box, and you can say, I just want to search this particular diagram or that diagram and its children, and it's a feeling lucky thing that just takes you to the first instance. But these are things you just type in and go, and it'll find the search results, gives you a table view kind of thing.
Okay. All right. There's one question that just came in. Last question. Can I import custom pictures?
Yeah, that would be either a background image or what we call free draw object or picture or icon. So for instance, this map here is actually a imported map. So if I right click, I can say import picture, or I can import background. In this case, I would do a background because I'm going to fill the whole thing. If it's a picture, it's something you can move around and sort of float around the drawing. So those are all things you can bring in. Standard formats are supported: PNG, JPEG, SVG, GIF, TIFF, that type of stuff.
All right, that's the last of the question.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. We went over a little bit, but thanks for hanging in there. And if you have more questions, just reach out. Let us know.
Yes, thank you, everyone, for your time. Again, if you're interested in looking at NetTrain further, feel free to contact us on our website or email us at sales@graphlnetworks.com. But thank you, everyone, for your time. Appreciate it. And happy documenting.
Yeah. Bye, everybody. Thanks.